Dear learners, in this lecture we shall be continuing our discussion on the passing of property. This is discussed under the chapter of effects of contract, which are essentially the consequences or legal effects that follow the making of sale, one of which is passing of the property from the seller to the buyer. So in our previous discussion on passing of property, it was with specific reference to ascertained or specific goods. So in this short lecture, we shall be looking at the rules of transfer relating to unascertained or unspecific goods. So the rules of transfer can be divided into two parts. First, related to specific or ascertained goods, section 19 to 22 and section 24. Whereas for generic, unspecific or unascertained goods, we have section 18, 23 and 25. Now to just recollect our discussion, specific goods are those which have been identified and agreed upon between the parties at the time of sale, whereas unspecific or unascertained goods have not been identified or agreed upon by the parties before the sale. So therefore, they remain generic in nature. Now to take up the general rule as provided under section 18, it lays down that the goods must be ascertained. Where there is a contract for the sale of unascertained goods, no property in the goods is transferred to the buyer unless and until the goods are ascertained. So it makes a strong rule that there could be no transfer of property with regard to unascertained or unspecific goods. So first and foremost, what has to be done is to convert unascertained or unspecific goods to ascertained or specific goods. Only then the transfer of property can take place. So section 23 of the Sale of Goods Act deals with the situation where the goods are unascertained. However, they could be ascertained by an agreement between the parties or through an action on the part of the seller or the buyer. Only thereon the property can pass. So under section 23, the goods are unascertained by description. So the buyer has described the seller about the goods. The goods are in deliverable state, meaning thereby nothing more has to be done to the goods in order to make them a finished product. So if they are unconditionally appropriated to the contract, either by the seller with the assent of the buyer or by the buyer with the assent of the seller, such appropriation can be by express means or implied means through the conduct of the parties. Only after such appropriation has been done by either party with the consent of the other party, that the property passes from the seller to the buyer. Now we shall take a look as to how this provision applies in real life cases. Supposing there is a contract whereby the retailer is to supply 100 cans of soft drink to buyer X on March 10th. So here, let us assume that the retailer has got 1000 cans and 100 cans have to be appropriated to the contract. So this is an example of unascertained goods. Unless and until somebody does an action of segregating these 100 cans from the 1000 cans, the goods will remain unspecific or unascertained. So here the goods can be apportioned to the contract or they can be appropriated to the contract either by the seller with the assent of the buyer. So the buyer can give liberty to the seller to segregate the 100 cans from the 1000 cans, or the buyer can himself do it in the presence of the seller. So in this case, the appropriation can be done either by the buyer or the seller with the consent of the other party. Now let us take up an e-commerce transaction. Supposing you wish to order a book on Amazon. You have the name of the book, India the Emerging Giant by unknown economist Arvind Panagria. So when you check on the Amazon website, you see that there are 3 items that are available in stock, but the items that are ordered are only 1. So the question is, who appropriates the 1 item that is selected to the contract? So usually in e-commerce transactions, because the buyer is not physically available to segregate the goods from the rest of the lot, so in this case he is not physically available to segregate the 1 piece that he wants from the 3 that are available. So here it is like the buyer who gives his assent to the seller to appropriate 1 book out of the stock of 3 to his contract. So here the appropriation is implied appropriation by the seller with the assent of the buyer. Similarly, to take up another case, X delivers a scooter to Y on sale on approval basis. So the scooter has to be used by the receiver of the goods. He has to test it and approve it. Only thereon can be a sale. Y approves the scooter and enter into contract with X to buy it. So here what has happened is that the buyer has appropriated the goods to the contract with the assent of the seller. So this is an example of express appropriation. So express appropriation is that appropriation when it is given in the contract itself and the party is specified who is going to make the goods as specific goods. To take another exercise, X went to Y's shop, fruit vendor, to buy 1 kg of oranges. Y's shop had a stock of 10 kg oranges. Y said to X, choose any 1 kg from the lot. X did so. So here what we find is, to begin with, the goods were unascertained because they were lying in a larger lot of 10 kg. And to make them specific, someone had to segregate 1 kg from the rest of the 9 kg. In this case, the seller communicated to the buyer that he can choose any 1 kg from the 10 kg, and X did so. So in this case, the goods were ascertained by the buyer with the assent of the seller. So again, this is an example of an express appropriation. Then to take up another illustration, under an agreement to sell 5 liters of petrol from a lot in a storage tank belonging to the seller pours out 5 liters in a container that is provided by the buyer. So in this case, who ascertained the goods? So who is doing the act of pouring the 5 liters from a storage tank? It is being done by the seller. So here the goods are being ascertained by the seller with buyer's assent. To take up another case, under the agreement between the author and the publisher was to deliver the first copy of the book to the author. So in this case, who ascertained the goods? So as we find, there is a first copy which is identifiable from the rest of the lot. So supposing there is an order to the publisher to print 100 copies, and if the buyer would have said, give me any copy, then he was delegating the responsibility of ascertaining the goods to the seller. But here, certain specifications are given in the contract wherein the seller has to give the first copy to the buyer. So here, the ascertainment is being done as per the terms of the contract, and it is the buyer who has kind of delegated to the seller to do the ascertainment of goods. So with this, we conclude our discussion on the passing of the property with regard to unascertained goods. In the previous lecture, we did with regard to ascertained goods. As a general rule, no contract of sale can be made and transfer of property cannot be effected unless and until the goods are ascertained. With this, we end this lecture. Thank you very much.